Hello, everyone. Welcome back as we try to finish up Truman today. Um, in Truman's presidency, we enter into the 1950s. So, we're going to talk about some of the things that characterized the 1950s and finish up some of a little bit more about his presidency. We talked about the end of World War II and what that meant with communism. We also talked about the start of the Korean War, which is still going on when his term ends. I know this is the last week. You can already tell we're not going to be able to finish. I'm going to try. So many of you have been wanting to get to Kennedy, so I'm going to try this week to get through Eisenhower and at least introduce Kennedy. And we'll see how that goes. Um, if you would like, I'm just going to throw this out there. If you would like me to continue doing these lectures on the president so that you can watch some more even throughout the summer, you don't have to respond to anything. You don't have to, it won't be for a grade. Obviously, we'll be done. But if you'd like to hear more, I will try to finish the presidents for you throughout the summer. Just let me know. Either send me an email or let me know in a comment what you would be interested in. Okay, but that's not your grade comment today. Okay, now the 50s. What does the 50s look like? One, the soldiers came back from war, and so we have what's called the baby boom. So many of them got married and started families. So you have this picture here is from one of the hospitals at the time. You have a lot of babies being born at the same time. And then those people that were born during that time, right after World War II, are called the baby boomers, the baby boom generation. And my mom is one of them. She was born in 1954. My dad in 1953. So that's the baby boom generation. So it's the age right now that's getting to retirement. So it's your grandparents' age, pretty much. Of the baby boomers. Now, what happens when you have all these soldiers coming home and they're starting families? Many of them are getting married. What do you need? You need houses and you need land for these houses. You need a place for them to live. So we have the beginning of the suburbs. There was a construction company called Levitt and Brothers, I think it was. And he started building these houses that were could be put up very quickly within a day and were kind of cheap to build, and they could build lots of them, and they built them pretty much the same. They looked exactly the same, and they went down a big piece of land and they just built one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And these towns that were popping up outside of the city. So for the first time, people are actually moving outside of the city. Cars are way more common. They're moving outside of the city and building these towns, and these are called suburbs. So urban means in the middle of the city. So sub is like below the city. So not quite urban. You're not in the city. You're outside of the city. I grew up in Memphis, and you have a lot of these. You have like the city center of Memphis, but then you have all these neighborhoods around, which is the suburbs. Okay, so moving outside of the actual city. And so the first ones of these were called Levitt towns. And you can see a picture here where the houses just look exactly the same. And they were built one after the other to be able to supply this increased demand of housing. A popular name at the time is Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson broke what is called the color barrier in professional baseball by being the first African American to be on a professional baseball team with people who were white. So this is not an African American team. We had those before, right? I told you about the Negro Leagues, but this is him coming into a team that's all white. Think about how hard this would be. He would be traveling around with his team to other cities that had segregation. He would not be allowed to eat in restaurants that the rest of his team players were allowed to eat in. There are people who stood up at the baseball games and yelled things at him and called him names. I read a story about him that when he was basically being interviewed to see if they were going to allow him to come onto the team, the manager of the baseball team was like awful to him. He was like yelling things at him and calling him bad names and stuff. And he did it to see how he would react. Because if Jackie would instantly get angry, and if he would be the one to fight, and if he would be the one to yell bad names back, then he was not who they needed. Can you imagine how he could have harmed integration if he had done it in a bad way? He was treated awfully. But if he had started a fight every time someone called him a name, then people would use as an excuse to see, you can't let them play with us. See how they act? They would use it against him even though they would be the one to start it. See how hard that would be to be the first one? He had to overlook so many things. He had to be the kindest, most perseverant person ever to be able to do that. And you know, I've been to the place where he played the first game. It is in New York, and it is the place where he broke the color barrier. And you know what? It is right outside of like a laundry room of an apartment complex. It is so weird. I knew a man who lived in this apartment complex, and he said, this is on the field that Jackie Robinson played on that first time. It was built over it. And he said, I'm going to show you the place. Well, we go and we wander through, and it's just this little plaque right in front of this door. There were these people standing around just talking and standing there having their smoke break. They worked at the building, and we just walked up, and there it was. There's just a little plaque. This is where Jackie Robinson stood and broke the color barrier. It's amazing that it's not set aside more kind of museum like. Okay, Nehemiah should be able to tell us a little bit about this, and I like how she commented earlier about how Lucy would have been this age. She was relating some of the things she was learning in history to Lucy, who she researched earlier in the year. And I think a lot of you have done that. Once you research someone, you've always got that kind of in the back of your mind. Just like Nate gave us some extra things about Hoover when we were talking about Hoover. So I Love Lucy starts coming on TV about this time. This is what a TV would have looked like in the 1950s. So right at the end of 1940s, TV started to be a little bit more common in homes, and by 1951, almost half of American homes had a TV. It just instantly became something that everyone wanted. So we switched from radio to TV in just the space of a couple years. And then this picture is from a popular kids show at the time called Howdy Doody. And it was a cowboy that had this cowboy kind of puppet. And so he was very popular for over a decade. And it was, his famous line was he'd come out and say, "What time is it?" And they'd say, "It's Howdy Doody time." And that would start the TV program every time. Okay, so that's a little bit about what's going on. TV, houses being built. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the soldiers coming back too, and what they could do. And this is just an idea of everything's kind of settling down. A lot of people thought that women would not want to leave the factories and the workplace once they were given that kind of freedom and ability during World War II, but most of them did. Many of them were happy to leave that, let their husbands go back to work, and then they went back home and took care of their families, like the baby boom that were growing, and stayed at home. Okay, now let's get in a little bit about President Truman's policy, because we're coming off of Eisenhower, who had all of these plans for all these programs, right? The New Deal, that let's start this, and government money to this and this and this and this and this. So what is Truman's policy? Truman did continue a lot of that, and his was called the Fair Deal. And I love this poster. This is of a man. He looks like he's a miner or something, and it says, "All we want is a fair deal. Just we want to be treated right too." And so he continues and expands to Social Security, which is the idea that once you get to a certain age, you're able to collect money because you've been working your whole life. You're able to collect monthly money from the government. And then he also puts in what's called a GI Bill of Rights, and this was for the soldiers. So the soldiers coming back from war were provided. First of all, there was money to start veterans hospitals where the soldiers would be able to go and get their medical treatment. Then they were also given money towards housing. They were given money towards going back to college. So many of these men, because you think most of the young men that went over to serve in World War II were in their 20s, and probably early. You had a lot of 18, 19, 20, 21-year olds going, and they come back and they're fresh out of high school. They left college to go and serve their country. So what are they going to do? The government gives them money so that they can go back to school and learn a trade to support their family. And these men did. That's what they did. In the book, I told you I was reading a book called The Greatest Generation. It's just story after story of what made this a good generation. Because they knew the value of work. They knew the value of duty, responsibility, going to serve their country, and then coming back and working, and the responsibility of caring for a family. And my granddad came back from the war, and he trained as a like neon lights, like when you see Pizza Hut and it's got the neon lights and signs. He was a neon tube bender, so he trained in that and was able to help make signs like that. And then Truman also desegregated the armed forces by executive order. So he didn't have to wait for Congress to do this. He just did it by a presidential order in 1948. And what this means is there's no segregated troops. No African American troop here and then a white troop here. They were together. And Truman did this. I think Truman did a lot for civil rights. And he wanted to do more, but there was a lot of opposition by Southern senators and Southerners in the House of Representatives that he wasn't able to get as much done as I think he wanted to. A couple other things that he passed: the Fair Housing Act, which gave money towards new public housing. So the government gives money to put these houses up, and then it's lower rent or pay for people to live in. And urban renewal. So a lot of these places in the city that had gotten so bad and so much crime and the houses were falling, the apartments were awful, it was to renew that, to kind of tear all that down and fix it up and make it better. Fair Employment Practices Act. This is another one that I think is cool for him, standing up for rights of everybody. This outlawed racial and religious discrimination in hiring. So if I were hiring someone, I couldn't say, well, I don't hire black people or I don't hire Jews. Even though we didn't have Hitler over here, there was still a lot of stigma, which means kind of prejudice against people of different religions, like Catholic or Jews, and people didn't want to hire them. Now, here's an idea. This was kind of fun. I was playing with this a little bit because I was talking about he increased the minimum wage. And then I was like, I wonder how much things cost. And so I did a little bit of a comparison for you so that you could see. So the minimum wage is how much that if I get a job, my employer has to pay me according to the government. So the government has set a low bar, like this is what you have to do, okay, so that people now couldn't say, well, I'll hire you for $0.25 an hour. You can't do that. The government sets what is the lowest rate that you can pay someone per hour. Now, what happened though, and I'm going to show you a chart in the next screen, is each state can vote on their own minimum wage. So a state, as long as it doesn't go lower than the federal one. So the federal is, set really low, but as a state, you could say, no, we need to raise our minimum wage. Okay? Now let's talk about this for just a minute, because everyone's like, yes, we want to raise the minimum wage. Yay, yay, yay. Pay us more, pay us more. Okay? But think about what that affects for just a second. If the government says the lowest you can pay someone, if you hire them, is $12 an hour. Okay, what about if I have a little cafe? I only have about 5 or 6 employees. I'm barely just making enough to pay the rent for my restaurant and to buy the food I need and to pay servers. If they raise the minimum wage, am I going to be able to continue my business? Maybe not. Raising minimum wage is really hard on small businesses. So then I can't hire as many people, so I fire people. And that happens all over the country. So could raising the minimum wage actually be bad for the country instead of good? It could. If it raises it too high and then the businesses aren't able to keep up with it, they fire lots of people, and then we have another depression, even though you were wanting them to get paid more. So to be a responsible thinker, remember we have to think about all the cause and effects. What does this affect? So Truman increased the minimum wage. It was 40 cents an hour to 75 cents an hour. So I was thinking about that, and I was like, okay, 75 cents an hour. How much is the minimum wage now? Look, the minimum wage today is $7.25 federally, but West Virginia has increased it to $8.75. So no one in this state, now I think there are exceptions, like restaurants, servers can get paid less because they get tips. But for the jobs that apply to this, $8.75 is your minimum. Okay, so in 1950, if you got minimum wage, you would earn $6 a day, and $30 a week would be normal. Okay, so today, normal for a day, and this is minimum. Okay, so a lot of people get paid more than this. Minimum wage is $70 a day and $350 a week. Look at the difference. $30 a week to $350. But how much did things cost? A house cost $7,000. Oops, I left out a zero. $7,000, and today an average house costs about $200,000. So from $7,000 to $200,000. And we're not talking about this one's so much better. We're talking about that's the comparison in prices. So then an average car was about $1,500, and today an average car is about $35,000. You could go to a restaurant. I was looking at an old menu. You can pull up some pictures of old menus from the 50s. And a sandwich was like 50 cents. A whole meal, like a dinner meal, was like $1.75. So you could eat, one person could eat at a restaurant for less than $2. Okay? Now today, one person can probably eat less than $10, but it's about $10, right? If you go to a sit-down restaurant, especially, it's going to be about $10 a person. So there's a little bit of some comparisons about how much it would be, the difference. Now here is a cool chart I wanted to show you. This shows you the state minimum wages of all of the states. Now this is what I'm interested. There are 2 states that are lower than the federal minimum, and I don't know how they can do that. That would be a question that I would have, and I would have to try to look up. How can you not meet the federal minimum? I don't understand that. There's 2 states that have no law, like no state law as to what their minimum wage has to be. And there's some that are equal. So the green is equal to federal minimum. All of these green ones are the same as what the federal government has said. But the blue ones, and we're one of them, are the ones that have gone higher than minimum wage. So if you want to move, you might want to look at this and say, where could I get paid the most? Okay, so let's look. Where could you get paid the most? At a minimum wage job. So California gives you $13. Washington is $13.50. Oregon is $12. Colorado's $12. These are some of the higher ones. But you know what? I think it's more expensive to live there. Like houses are more expensive, gas is more expensive, groceries are more expensive. It depends on where you live according to the prices of things. So that was just something kind of interesting I thought I'd show you. Okay, now another thing that's coming in that started happening in the 1950s was what's come to be known as McCarthyism. I told you that there was a new fear. We talked about this last time. The new fear is communism. And Stalin, who is the leader of of what we call Russia now, but the USSR, was trying to take over and wanted more and more places to be communist. And it was called the Red Scare. And there was a big fear of communism, the spread of communism, and then it became a fear of being accused of being a communist. There was a fear that communists were in, and that should have an S on it, that communists were in our government trying to change things. So Truman even ordered loyalty investigations of the government. So investigations of everyone that had a part in the government to examine whether they were loyal to our type of government, whether they were trying to come in and change us somehow. And I want to tell you that a while before this, decades before the time we're talking about, communism was talked about, and there were some people that might have shown some interest in it at the time when it wasn't seen as dangerous. But if they had ever gone to any of those meetings or ever shown any of those ideas before, it would come back and get them now, because it would be on their record, and they would be the ones that would be called up and said, "Oh, I see that you went to a meeting in 1930. Like, well, but I don't believe that anymore. Well, you're fired. We can't trust you." So this led, and a lot of people in the entertainment business were what you call more liberal in their beliefs or in their ideas of government, and so many of them were being questioned, and they could actually be blacklisted, meaning that you aren't allowed to have a job. And this hurt a lot of entertainers, because not only were they fired from their job, but they couldn't get a job anywhere. And many of this was false labeling, and it wasn't accurate. It was just a fear that was spreading and spreading and spreading. And it even spread from communism to like anyone who acts different. If you act really different from us, then you must be communist. That was the idea. And the one that mainly started this or increased this fear was Joseph McCarthy, who was a first-time senator from Wisconsin. And he started most of this when he stood up, and this started in West Virginia, so that's interesting. He's not from West Virginia, but he was giving a speech, I think in Wheeling, and he stood up and he claimed that he had a list of over 200 names of people that were involved in the Communist Party that were in our government. So I have a list of 200 names of people that are working in our government to change our government to communist. Well, what does that do to the everyday person? It scares them. It creates this fear. Oh, we need to get rid of them. Do whatever you can to get rid of those communists. Okay? So there were thousands of employees. This led, oops, I'm finding lots of mistakes here. This led to thousands of government employees being fired. So they would be interviewed. They would say, well, we have on record here that you had a friend that went to Russia in 1930. Well, you're too risky, so we fired you. And I'm not kidding that it could be that much of a connection, and that's it. Because there was a huge fear, and people were not willing to take a chance. But, and we see the end of him, he's still going strong when Truman leaves. But when Eisenhower comes to presidency, he's still a little scared of Joseph McCarthy because this guy's getting a lot of people fired. And people are listening to him for whatever reason. And he could make, by speaking out against him, you could be blacklisted. And so, but in 1954, he turns his attack to the U.S. Army. And when he does that, everyone's like, whoa, wait a minute. These are the people fighting against communism for us. What is he talking about? And then his ultimate downfall was they showed his hearings. So when he was questioning the army, they showed it on TV. And they saw that he was bullying, that he was he wasn't giving them a chance to speak, that he was assuming things, that he didn't really have any support. He was just like it's called badgering. He was badgering the witness, and everyone saw this on TV. Now remember, thousands and thousands of people are buying TVs and they're watching it in their homes. And so he instantly just loses all of his power. And they're like, wait a minute. And then so it takes people, think about that. It takes people believing in what people are saying to give something power. And it takes fear. Fear will give someone power too. And everyone was fearful, and it drove this man to have amazing power to fire people and to just create a fear in our whole country. Now, I want you to go back and I want you to think about TV again for a minute, because we said TV is really starting to take hold in most homes. Programs are being available that people can watch in their homes, which would include news. So news programs are available now. But remember, we did have the radio before, so you can't take that away. But we've got programs like comedy shows like I Love Lucy. You've got children's shows, Howdy Doody. So now, instead of gathering around the radio, people are gathering around the television. So I want you to think about how you think family life would have changed in the 1950s. And a lot of it may be having to do with TV. You could think about another thing too, but kind of centering around TV. How do you think that the TV has changed family life? Is it better? Is it worse? Maybe what are some good things that it has done? What are some bad things that it has done? Talk to me in this discussion a little bit about how you think TV has changed things. And give me lots of different ideas too. It's not just, there's not one right answer, right? So tell me what you're thinking about the change that TV has brought into our homes.